Bereshit, Genesis chapter 1, New Translation from the JPS Gender Sensitive Translation. When God began to create heaven and earth, the earth being unformed and void, with darkness of the surface of the deep and a wind from God sweeping over the water, God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from darkness. God called the light day and called the darkness night, and there was evening and there was morning, a first day. This week, the entire Jewish people across the world are reading from the same exact words of Torah, the same words we've been reading from for 2 millennia. When we read Bereshit, we tend to focus on what God creates. God creates light, darkness, a huge space in between the ocean and sky, dry land, trees, seeds, stars and the moon and the sun, all kinds of living creatures. God creates human beings in charge of it all. All of this is the stuff of the universe in this first creation myth of ours. What we rarely focus on is the process, the how of creation. And this is not surprising. It's how our minds work. We see images, and those images can tell a story. But images do not paint themselves. Ours is a story with authors, and these authors were very clear about how God creates. Separation. Before separation, there is this blob of nothingness, chaos and emptiness. Those 2 words in Hebrew, tohu vavohu, are the most mysterious words in the Torah, precisely because they cannot be imagined. We could argue that even God can't imagine the tohu vavohu, the null and void, because it's only subsequently that God even begins the process of creating. It's from this void that God gets to work, that God separates one thing from another. God labels each thing so we can name what it is and what it is not. This is how God acts. This defines holiness. And that Hebrew word that describes our own aspiration to be God-like, Kodesh, actually means separate, distinguished. In Genesis, God creates the world for reality, distinguishing for reality. And this is something we can see this week as to why. Because every time we try to speak about this tohu vavohu, this chaos, our words fall short. God creates words for reality. I have no doubt that my own words tonight will fall short. And like most of you, I cannot string together a coherent, sensible statement. We've all been reading and listening to profound attempts at solace or sense-making or prayer, all of which are fleeting at best, and more often than not futile. But what we know from tohu vavohu is that there's a reality that even God cannot name. There are no words that describe what has been done to Israel, the state, and Israel, the people, inasmuch as such a distinction exists this week. No words for what Hamas did and does intentionally and strategically. No words that sufficiently connect our hearts to the souls who were massacred. No words that rescue the more than 130 hostages of various ethnicities, political views, and nationalities, including 20 Americans. No words that can instantly transport countless numbers of Palestinian civilians out of northern Gaza, especially when Hamas is dead set on keeping them there in the hell of war. No words. No words can provide lasting comfort to those sheltering in bunkers or called to fight and maybe die, or those who right now are praying that their missing children or parents or siblings are being held hostage in Gaza. Let that sink in, that countless Israelis right now are praying that their missing loved ones are being held hostage in Gaza. There are no words. And for all of us, words are the only thing that we really have. So we use them, or we try to use them. We try to distinguish one thing from another, light from dark, love from hate, and right from wrong. How we distinguish one thing from another speaks volumes about how we strive to become more human. And we strive in different ways, often conflicting. So many in this community have experienced pain this week caused by the ways in which leaders have or have not drawn distinctions. The distinction between ruthless terrorism and legitimate defense. The distinction between targeting civilians and armed forces. The distinction between saying something and saying nothing. A great many of us are pained by the blurring of these distinctions. Nothing's been more outrageous in the public square than the volume of support for pro-Hamas terrorists. There is a distinction lost here, the distinction between resistance and cold-blooded murder. We cannot let this distinction dissolve. We hear widespread respected leaders who are digging in to the unconscionable argument that assigns 100% of the blame of the bloodbaths to Israel. I don't need to go through the list of horrific accounts of mass murder. Surely I don't want to hand Hamas the victory of syndicating the videos that they intentionally took of butchering our people's bodies. But what does it take to wake up our neighbors to the distinctions between good and evil? The loss of that distinction is heartbreaking, and a great many of us in this room have shed tears over it this week. Some of us have lost friendships this week. Maybe you feel betrayed by your teachers or your students or your employers or your employees or your elected leaders. Maybe some of those leaders act exactly as you would have expected because you know the bigotry that they harbor in their hearts. The distinction between speaking out and remaining silent is among the more prevalent pains I've heard from community members here this week. The silence of so many of the institutions that we turn to for leadership, for support, our workplaces, our schools, our universities, our community organizations. Silence. The spurious adherence to the illusion of neutrality comes at a cost. Yesterday, I watched a video of an altercation in my high school in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, involving kids who were dressing up as Hamas militants. The entire day went by, and the school said nothing publicly. Eventually, the students Jewish and Muslims organized to create a statement affirming the values that the adult leaders failed to name. We know all the reasons why people stay silent, and it's not because they themselves are evil. I don't accept that. For the first 10 years after he was liberated from Auschwitz, Elie Wiesel was silent. He later explained why. He said, "I was afraid of language." How do we find the right words? We're all afraid of language, and for good reason. Our words can create, our words can destroy. But we've learned from our history that silence too can destroy. It's complicated, we hear leaders say, of the relationship between Israel and Palestine. Of course it is. That's why we strive to educate ourselves with nuance. But nuance has a distinction from neutrality. Nuance is all about distinctions, the wisdom that we acquire when we look closely and discern for the sake of truth and reality. Neutrality, on the other hand, is chaos. It's tohu vavohu. And as our history has shown us, it bends toward dehumanization. Neutrality is where terrorism lays its eggs. Yesterday, it seemed like every parent who sends their kids to Jewish day school was asked by someone, a family member, a friend, "Are you sending your kids to school tomorrow?" And this is not the first time that we've heard this question of parents, of Jewish kids. We heard it after 9/11. We heard it more recently with the Pittsburgh massacre. But I can't recall them actually keeping the kids home, not until today, as I'm learning from many of my rabbinic colleagues, who some themselves and some of their congregants kept their kids home. We all have different voices and pains and trauma. I can't imagine, for instance, being the teacher in a classroom with an Israeli and Palestinian student. What do you say? I hope our leaders say something. I hope our leaders lead. Don't say nothing. We can be champions of nuance when we reject neutrality. Let me draw another distinction. Rejecting neutrality doesn't mean choosing between Israelis and Palestinians. That just promotes ignorance. Nuance is not neutrality. It's nuance that enables our values to live in public life, uncomfortably but humanly. Few have modeled the integrity of nuance this week more beautifully than the President of the United States, Joe Biden, as he addressed the massacres this week. The remarks of the President of the United States need to be heard by everyone. He named the atrocities. He called out the bloodthirsty brutality of Hamas. He tried with his words to make it impossible for the world to look away from our infants and our young ones, to look away from our elderly, to look away from us as human beings in all our variety, all our vulnerability. He saw our people. And by the way, the question of whether or not my fellow progressives on the left are comfortable with the notion of peoplehood becomes completely irrelevant when terrorists are dancing in our blood. We are a people. And our president named that distinction when he said, "For the Jewish people, this is not new." It matters that we have a president of the United States who's not neutral. It matters that we have a president of the United States that says the United States stands with the people of Israel in the face of this terrorist assault. Israel, he says, has the right to defend itself and its people, full stop. It matters that he rejected neutrality without sacrificing nuance. It matters that he said to the prime minister of Israel that Israel must follow international laws of war. It matters that he lifted up the Palestinians' right, the Palestinian people's right to dignity and self-determination. It matters that he used his voice to remind the civilized world that Hamas's stated purpose is the annihilation of the state of Israel and the Jewish people. It matters that he said the words, full stop. When we say full stop, we're drawing a line, a distinction between one sentence and another, between words that might otherwise seem like a chaotic pool of nothingness. Israel has a right to defend itself, full stop. There is no justification for terrorism, full stop. Innocent civilians deserve to be safe, Israelis and Palestinians, full stop. Israel and Palestine must follow international law, full stop. Palestinians do have the right to self-determination, full stop. Hamas must be destroyed, full stop. Captives must be rescued, full stop. We're in so much pain, full stop. This will change what it means to be a Jew in America forever. Full stop. We need more allies here and abroad. Full stop. And we need each other. We need each other. Full stop. In that respect, one final word about separation. The therapists in our midst know quite well the power of transference. That is, the psychological tendency for us to redirect real, deep feelings from one person to another, or from one group to another. We could spend hours going into the many, many facets of transference that are at play in this moment. And with all my heart, I want to urge us here, myself included, to reflect on an interpersonal level. We are all vulnerable to transferring the pain or outrage or grief that we're feeling upon those who are close to us, or close-ish, upon each other. We have experienced or inherited a tremendous amount of trauma. We're experiencing so much right now. And in times of trauma, everything can come up all at once. It's like a psychic and interpersonal tohu vavohu, state of mind that's unable to distinguish, to separate, to connect to that power tool of discernment, that power tool of humanity. In this Shabbat, I pray for discernment, to know where and how to house our grief and outrage, to know where and how to speak out and say full stop, to know where and how to quiet our minds and listen to someone else's story. Sermons often end with what's called a nechemta. It's a closing word of comfort. Moments ago, I sat in my study thinking about what could give us comfort right now. So I recalled a teaching from the Talmud, and I typed it, and then I read it aloud, and then I deleted it because it was too comfortable. And then I recalled this midrash, one about Adam, the first human being at the end of creation. I typed it up and then I read it aloud. And I deleted it because it's too comfortable. And then 6 p.m. arrived. And I thought to myself, how's it going to end? And I came in here, grabbed my talit, I put it on. I remembered that for however as fraught as a flag might be, early Zionists who wanted nothing more than a place for Jews to be safe, they could have chosen anything for the flag, any symbol at all. And they chose the talit, the image of the talit. And they decided to make it the same exact size as the flag of the United States of America, in beautiful alignment of its democratic aspirations. It's fascinating to see the distinction between the flag on January 6th in Washington, D.C., the flag of the last administration, and the politicization of the flag, as if it's owned by one particular supremacist ideology. The distinction between that way of engaging with the flag and what is happening over the last months as Israelis on the left have been wrapping themselves in the Israeli flag without ever questioning for a second that they're somehow aligning against a perversion of the vision of Zion. Left, right, center, all over, with anger, with passion, with disagreement, they wrap each other and themselves in this flag, in this talit. When we say the blessing for the talit, we say, thank you, God, for giving us the mitzvah, the obligation of wrapping ourselves, of embracing ourselves in the talit, in this age-old tradition of commandment, of mitzvah, of obligation. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lehitatef batzitzit. Amen. If you'd like to join me, I'll be singing on page 678. Kol od balevav penima nefesh Yehuda Yisra Hadima Ain Litzion Sophia Olo Avda Tikvatenu Hatikva bat Shnot Alpayim Liotam Chofshi Be'artzeinu Eretz Zion Berushalayim Liotam Chofshi Be'artzeinu Eretz Zion Berushalayim.